What's up? My name is Elizabeth and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So today we're going to be talking about Psalm 90, and I think Psalm 90 is a really great passage because it really reminds us how short our days are. So with that being said, let's just jump right in and get started. The first thing I want to say is that we all have like these big decisions sometimes to make, and we're like, well, how do we make these decisions? How do we know how to live out our days properly? And so when we look at Psalm 90, we see that Psalm 90 is actually a poem. I believe is the oldest poem in Psalm written by Moses. A lot of people think Psalm was all written by David, but some of it was actually written by other people. For example, in Psalm 90, it was written by Moses. So actually the oldest Psalm, because Moses also wrote the Torah, the 5 books, or aka the Pentateuch, which is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So what we see here is that the children of Israel has just left Egypt from under the burdens of the Egyptians and decided to go to the promised land. And as they went to the promised land, they took 12 spies, went into the promised land, and when they went out of the promised land, 10 of the spies were like, this is too big, we can't overtake it, and they got scared, and so they ended up almost making a coup, so to speak, and God wasn't going to have it, pretty much. And so, anyhow, with that being said, he ended up having the children of Israel wander in the desert for 40 years, and those who were 20 years of age would die in the desert, except for Joshua and Caleb, who were faithful and said, yes, we can still take over the promised land. And so what we see here is that we're in the midst of right after the punishment was given out, and Moses, was interceding on the people's behalf for God to not destroy the group of people altogether. And so let me just read you the midst of it. But before we get to that, let me just tell you a few verses before that. What we see is that God is, pretty much about to destroy these. We see that we see how short our lives are. That's the point. Is that we see how short our lives are. And so after seeing how short our lives are, the question then is this, in verse 12 of Psalm 90, teach us to number our days, that we may get a heart of wisdom. We turn on, Lord, how long? Have pity on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your steadfast love, that we may rejoice and be glad all our days. Make us glad for as many days as you have afflicted us, and for as many years as we have seen evil. Let your work be shown to your servants, and your glorious power to their children. Let the favor of the Lord our God be upon us, and establish the work of our hands upon us. Yes, establish the work of our hands. The thing I want to note here is, first I want to show you guys this. This is kind of what I do when I look at all the different, when I kind of like dig deeper into scripture. I like to ask myself a lot of questions. Why is it said like this? What's kind of comparisons? There's comparison going on. And so I kind of mess this all up. And then what I do after that is I make it a lot neater. And this is how I make it neater. So I'm kind of going to go over with you what this is. And this is kind of like my brain processing this, because this is a step that you need before you jump right into applications. So you have verse 12 where it says teach us what to number our days. Why do we need that? In order to gain a heart of wisdom. And then this plea, return, Lord, pity your servants, satisfy us. How do they want to be satisfied us? With love, so that we can rejoice, so that we can be glad. Make us glad. How much do we want to be made glad? How long do we want to be made glad? For as many days as we are afflicted, for as many years as we have seen evil. Because look, they are going to see evil. They are going to see these things. God is pretty much taking his hand off of them. And pretty much they feel like God is turning their back, but really God isn't really turning his back. He's going to feed them he's feeding them in the desert. He's giving them water to drink. He's providing for them. And so that's the amazing story, is that even as Israel grumbles, God is still providing them. In verse 16 it says, let you show your works to your servants, power to your glorious children, because God had just said, I'm going to not show you guys any more miraculous power. And they say, no, please, still show it to our children. Moses is saying, let your favor be upon us, therefore establish our work of our hands. See, a lot of people think work is a curse. when really the curse is pain. See, the thing is, if you look at Genesis 3, the curse was the pain. See, when we talk about in the Garden of Eden, Genesis 1, it talked about tilling the ground. See, the thing and multiplying, they were never supposed to be painful. But because of the fall, they became painful, and therefore work became painful. But I believe in heaven we will work, but without the pain of it. And so then the question remains, what does it mean to have a heart of wisdom? How do we number our days? I think we number our days by having a heart of wisdom. And whatever that means, that's how we ought to number our days. And so the first question is, what is wisdom? I think wisdom is knowing what to do when we don't know what to do. Yeah, no, wisdom is like knowing what to do when we don't know what to do. See, oftentimes when we pray, we want knowledge. We want knowledge of the future. When God didn't say we get knowledge, God said he would give us wisdom to who asks in faith. And wisdom is knowing what to do without not always having the proper knowledge. And so that's really what it comes down to. And so when we look at these different aspects here, we need to ask ourselves through question: what does it tell us about God? What does it tell us about man? And how do we apply it to our own personal lives? So what does it tell us about God? I think it shows us God's sovereignty, how Moses is playing, because he knows that God is sovereign over everything. We see his grace, mercy, and power through it. We see specifically his mercy in this story, and not just in this verse, but we see it in context here. When we look at the whole entire story, see, mercy is not getting what you do deserve. They deserve to die. They deserve damnation, and they aren't getting it. So that's mercy. Grace is getting what you don't deserve. They're getting a chance to still live. For us, we're getting a chance to still walk in this earth just like Israel. See, one of the things I've said is anything less than damnation is God's grace and mercy. The fact that the rain will pour on the just and the unjust is called God's common grace. And so what I want to do is I want to read you guys a quick poem. It's really just a sketch poem, but it kind of helped me work through what I think this means specifically of how it relates to man. Because when we look at what it means about man, it means that we are at the hands of God. We are at the mercy of God. So then how do we apply it? If we are at the mercy of God, how do we number our days? How do we get wisdom? And maybe this seems like an abstract thing of how I poured this out, but let me show you this poem. Does that all mean? Why I wrote it like that is that I feel like oftentimes when we live in this world, we get sucked into this thinking that our lives don't mean anything, that we should just enjoy it, that we should just do whatever we want to do. And that's not the best way either, because we realize that we have an eternal soul. Yes, though our life is flickering, eternity is forever. It's forever. So whatever pain we're facing doesn't compare to how long eternity will be. Also in the poem where it says he moves when he moves, you ought to move. It's this image of in Exodus when we have the pillar of cloud, right, coming down and telling Israel they ought to move then or staying. You know, they will have a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. And that's how they would travel. And so really, what is wisdom? I think wisdom is living according to God. If man is at the hands of God, right, how else shall we live but then to live under God's hands? And then I was wondering, how do we know what is underneath God's hands? How do we know how to live according to God's ways? Well, in Psalm 119, I believe, 9 says, how shall a young man keep his ways pure? By living according to your word. See, understanding and reading God's words will help us understand how we ought to live our lives, to learn how to apply it to whatever is next. I think another way that we can live under God's will is just by doing the right thing. You know, I've been thinking a lot about Elisabeth Elliot, and she talked about this old Saxon poem about doing the next right thing, because I think sometimes in our life we have big decisions to make, and sometimes in life we try to make those big decisions too fast, and we spend more of our time trying to make those big decisions than we do making the small ones that are going to ultimately affect our big decisions. Sometimes I know in my personal life, I get hasty and start planning like I have knowledge of the future when I don't. And I don't think that's how I ought to use my time. How I ought to use my time is knowing what I can do right now. Oftentimes that isn't thinking about the future. In a part it is, but most of the time it's just by being where I'm supposed to be in the moment. Being with my family when I'm supposed to be with my family. You know, worshiping God when I'm supposed to be worshiping God, instead of thinking or trying to figure out, trying to decipher the future when I don't have that knowledge. Wisdom is knowing what to do despite having the knowledge of the future. So how do we live? How do we know how to number our days? By utilizing and stewarding our time and our resources right now. There is a moment where we can plan. But it's fruitless to plan when we don't have what we need to actually truly plan. So what we do is learn how to take the time that we do have right now, and the knowledge that we do have right now, and how to utilize that to the best of our ability, instead of coming up with all the theories of the what ifs. There is a time for that, but I think, at least for me personally, and this is again where application comes for us personally, you might look at it and go, okay, so I know I'm supposed to live under God's hand. I know I'm supposed to do according to his word, but that might look differently for you in that season of life. For my season of life, it's taking what I can do right now. What I can do right now is study God's word. What I can do right now is doing my best where I am right now. And then when I start getting more information about what maybe the next step for me, I will take that in, I will process it, and then I will let it go, as in leave it at bay, instead of thinking, okay, I need to start doing something else. No, just leave it at bay and let it be for now. There's plenty of other things for me to do instead of worrying about tomorrow. Matthew talks about stop worrying. Jesus talks about stop worrying about tomorrow. Tomorrow has its own trouble. But at the same time, he talks about count the cost too. So we need to have that balance. We need to have a balance of being in the moment and also counting the cost. And I think that's where wisdom comes in, understanding how to balance that off. And I think honestly, that just takes time. That takes maturity and time and a walk with God. It just takes time, and that's something that I'm working on. So I think to sum this all up, when it comes to how do we number our days, we number our days by living according to our word, according to God's word. And that's wisdom. Wisdom is living according to God's word and utilizing the information that we already have to therefore proceed to the next. So thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe and push that bell button, get notifications so you never miss another video again. And I'll see you guys next time. God bless you. Bye.